Good morning, everyone. Today is day 5 of the Writing Institute. Let's get started. Hello, welcome. If you are new to my channel, my name is Mariely Sanchez and I'm a 4th grade teacher in South Florida, and I'm currently attending the Glazer Lorton Writing Institute that is sponsored by my district and the University of Miami. Today is Monday, June 27th, 2022, and I can't wait to start another week. This is a 2-week Writing Institute and we've had some amazing speakers. Be sure to check out the videos that I have posted from the previous days 1 through 4, and I will also continue posting the rest of the week. So without further ado, let's go in and get our day started. It's a beautiful day to learn something new, and here we go, walking down this beautiful hallway full of beautiful quotes. Each quote is new every single day, so thank you to the person that does that. And then headed to breakfast. This is our breakfast table, and we had different things that were brought by our participants today, including this delicious casserole from Christina. Thank you so much, fruits. And this is my breakfast plate. We had the morning with Alice Kawazoe. She was our first presenter, and I can't wait to tell you all about it later. And in the afternoon, we had a presentation with all of these handouts and another new book by Gallagher, who shared his wisdom on writing. Stay tuned. All right, everyone, we just finished day 5 of the Writing Institute, and I have a ton of ideas to share with you. So I hope you'll also find these valuable. All right, so in the morning we started by coming in, and our little treat for today was a star clip. And then after that, we got our writing pieces out that we are going to publish and went ahead and paired up with another student in order to do the PQS strategy, which is for peer conferencing. So PQS stands for praise, questions, suggestions, and corrections. So actually, we should say PQSC. I think that's what they said, PQS. I forgot how they pronounced it. But that's the strategy that we use so that we can give each other feedback. So we basically swapped each other's writing pieces. We read it and provided that feedback to our fellow colleague. And then what they had us do is go around and read our writing pieces out loud. We actually ran out of time, so some of us are going to have to share it tomorrow after we published our final piece or our best draft of this writing piece that we're publishing. The one that I wrote was inspiration from the Where I'm From poem that I started writing with Georgia Hurd on Friday. And I just extended upon that, added some more verses, and made sure that I had it complete. I really liked it. I shared it with my parents, and they absolutely loved it. And I like that in a way I'm celebrating my island of Puerto Rico and the family memories that I remember growing up as a child there. So I'm really happy with my writing piece. The only feedback that, because we did get the writing pieces at the end of the day, because after we did the peer conferencing, other eyes from the facilitators looked at it throughout the day while we were in sessions, and then we received our writing piece at the end of the day with the suggestions. So the only suggestion I think I'm going to need to do is just to change my title so that it's all capital letters, no underlining. But I'm really happy with it, and I can't wait to have it turned in tomorrow. It's interesting because, you know how I mentioned I've been at this writing conference 3 times already, and each time that I submitted a piece, they have all been poems. But that's how it just happened to turn out. So then after that, we had our first morning presenter, which is Alice Kawazoe. And I've had the pleasure of listening to her in the past when I've come at the different times that I've come for the Institute. And she just has such a beautiful heart. You know, throughout her presentation, she was just pouring love and appreciation into everyone that was there participating. And here are some of the takeaways from little things that she shared here and there. So she started by sharing a little bit about her childhood. She came to the United States when she was 12 years old, and at that time she only knew Mandarin, Chinese, and Japanese. And she was a 7th grader in Illinois, but was soon tested and then got promoted to 8th and then eventually to 9th grade, which of course is high school, but she didn't have the English language. So one of the things that she mentioned to us was when you don't have language, it separates you, it isolates you, it makes you feel alone. So she stressed for us to look into our classrooms to any student that may feel isolated and not included, and that we as teachers are tasked to make sure that the students are all embraced by the classroom and we all feel like we belong. We talked a little bit about the difference between fitting in versus belonging, and how belonging is a feeling of comfort, a feeling that you have a place. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as we're building our classroom communities and we are addressing the needs of our students. One big component that she stressed was to care for the students, but care doesn't only have to be to the students, it also has to be towards us. And that's when she kind of segued and said, what stress level have you been able to survive through this school year that you are still here 2 weeks out of your summer break to learn strategies to help your students? So that was really nice to hear. So she's like, kisses to all of you for taking the time to be here and learning strategies and ways that you can help your students. She said something really great. She says, look back and look at all your victories and keep those victories in your heart, and they will push out eventually all the pain and agony that you've ever been through. Through everything that has happened these last couple years, we have survived, and that is not a small feat, and that's something that we should remember. That's when she then transitioned to the handout packet that she provided to us, which was Recover, Reconnect, and Revitalize. And it has a quote on the cover that says, "Hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word." And that's by Cory Booker, who is a senator from New Jersey. That's when we started reading the first article in the packet titled Kasserian Ingera. And that's basically a Maasai phrase that means, how are the children? And that's a question that they all ask because in their culture, if the children are all right, then everything is all right. So then she had us reflect if we can all honestly answer that question right now. And even if we can't answer it right now, we all have the opportunity to start to make a difference in the lives of our students, to see what they need in order to thrive, in order to just meet their basic needs. As we read the passage, she actually had us stand in a circle, and then every person will read one sentence until the entire passage was read. And then we talked a little bit about it. After that, we went ahead and read the next passage on the word Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a word that describes Mandela's greatest gift, that we are all bound together. So that's when she prompted our first writing activity for the day, which is think about someone in your life who has contributed to you being you. We wrote a little bit about this person, and then we spent time going around the room talking about them. I actually wrote about my mom, and I want to finish that piece so that I can actually give it to her. That's something that she stressed to us, that if we wrote about someone who is still alive, to make sure that we finish that piece and give it to them, because we shouldn't wait to tell someone how grateful we are for their impact in our lives and for things that they have done for us. So I thought that that was really beautiful, and I'm going to make sure that I do finish that writing piece. While someone was sharing, they mentioned something that Alice then said this, which really resonated with me. You don't need outside accolades. You can make your own accolades. And I really appreciated that. And she also stressed that when someone is sharing their writing, you should encourage students to look at them because, just having the courage to share something as personal as a writing piece that maybe came from the heart or from an experience, you need to make sure you give that person the time and appreciation for sharing something that may be really vulnerable to them. So again, this goes back, piggybacking with what we learned last week about building classroom community, like the activities that Dr. Precious Seminette shared with us. So it's very important that we honor their courage and their strength to share their writing. At the end of her presentation, she talked about the universe of language, which is an activity that she has shared in the past and I have done with my students. I'll insert a couple of examples here. Basically, students write down a number of words that represent them. This is a really great strategy for students that are learning English, for English language learners, because it helps them build vocabulary. But this also represents them, who they are, what they like, words that make up their universe. So these are the directions for completing this activity. Students are first going to gather 16 sight words, which shouldn't be very difficult because they're just writing down 16 things that they like to look at. Then they're going to write down 16 taste words. Again, not too difficult because they're just writing 16 things that they like to eat. Now, the next one, 16 things they like to touch that are associated with touch. So you will need to guide students on texture and give them examples of different textures that they might like so that they can make a list of 16. 16 hearing words, basically words that they like the sound of. 16 smell words, words that they like the smell of. And those are for the 5 senses. So as you can see, there's a bulk of them, 16 times 5, which is 80 words. And here's where the other 20 words come from. 10 verbs. And for this, just tell the kids to think of 10 things that they like to do, action words. Most of the time, these words are going to end in ing, or sometimes not, because instead of swimming, they might just put swim. Then after that, they're going to come up with 9 concrete words. And these 9 words can be words that can fit into other categories, but maybe you run out of space because you only had 16 to come up with. So if you want to add extra words that fit those 5 senses or verbs, you can add them. But if they cannot fit into any category, they can just write them down because those are words that are important to them. For example, I may say my mom is important to me, but she doesn't fit into any of the previous categories, but she's concrete, right? So I can add it as part of my 9 concrete words. The last word to make it 100 is an abstraction. An abstraction is an idea, a word that you can't really taste, see, touch, smell, or hear, but it's important to them. But they also need to make sure that they're very specific. So if they say love, love is very general. So what part of love is important to you? Is it empathy? Is it compassion? So those are just some examples of that. If you have students that are in lower grades, instead of 100 words, she says to just cut it down in half by 50. So instead of 100 words, it's 50. So instead of 16 sight words, it's 8. Instead of 10 verbs, it's 5. Instead of 9 concrete words, it's 4, etc. If you have students in kindergarten, this may not be the best activity for them to do unless you want to make one that encompasses what the entire class likes. Because the next thing that the students do, from the examples that I showed you, is they take all of these words and they draw a picture or a symbol that represents them or is important to them. And then they write the words on the lines of that picture. They erase the lines of the picture so the words form that shape, and then they color it in that represents them. She said this is a great activity to do at the beginning of the year, at the middle of the year, and at the end of the year so students can see the progress. Now, if you're kindergarten, instead of doing that, you can have them draw a self-portrait at the beginning of the year, then one in the middle of the year, and then one at the end of the year so that students can see how they have grown. So that is how our morning finished. I'm actually going to take a little break from sharing because I have tons of stuff to share with you from the afternoon presenter, but I have a dentist appointment to get to right now. So I apologize. I don't know how I'm going to feel after the dentist, but after the dentist, I will share what our afternoon presenter, Gallagher, shared about writing, and I took copious notes. So get ready for that. See you in a second. All done with the dentist, and this whole side of my mouth is numb. But here we go with the tidbits from the afternoon presenter. We did receive a copy of his book right here, Write Like This, Teaching Real World Writing Through Modeling and Mentor Text. And that's basically the gist of this presentation is how do we teach writing? Well, definitely by having students write and get into the habit of writing every single day, but also looking at specific mentor texts and the structure of those texts so that they can go ahead and know exactly how they should go about their writing. He said sometimes students ask the question, how long does it have to be? And in reality, what they're asking is, how does it look like? Usually students don't know exactly what is expected of the type of writing that they're working on. So it's very important to use models and mentor texts in order to give students examples of real world writing examples. Oh boy, I just noticed that some of the words are kind of difficult to pronounce with part of your mouth numb, but I'm going to keep pushing through it. So let me tell you a little bit about Gallagher. He is a former teacher. He actually left the classroom in 2020, not due to the pandemic. He just had it planned, and then the pandemic happened to happen. He had been teaching for 35 years at that time, and now he works as a coach going to different schools teaching students about writing. He started out by saying that the problem is that a lot of writing teachers teach to the test instead of focusing on teaching volume. What he means by volume is getting students used to writing every single day and expanding upon that writing. Maybe they'll start writing for 10 minutes and they get to this much of the page. And then they continue writing until they can get through a whole page in just 10 minutes. And then 2 pages in 20 minutes, etc. He went over 4 things that he believes make students better writers: volume, choice, modeling, and feedback. He showed us a slide where it had a question that someone asked, and the question was, how can we increase student achievement? Which is the wrong question to ask. Instead, we should be asking, what can we do to engage, stimulate, and motivate students? Once we do that, the rest will follow. They'll be able to address the various writing tasks that we have them participate in. He shared some everyday practices that he always likes to keep in mind when he is planning his lessons. He shared that every day students should be reading, writing, studying, creating, and sharing. Those are the 5 elements of a really good ELA classroom. Now, this is definitely aspirational because he says sometimes there are days that you may pull one of these out depending on what you are teaching. But students should definitely be engaged in writing every single day. They need to write and write and write and write. The way some classrooms are balancing writing is really unbalanced because we are focusing more on writing tasks instead of having students write more in order to discover their thinking. There are two reasons kids write. One, to know what they know, and two, because it generates thinking. The very act of writing will lead you to thinking that you probably didn't know you had. Task-oriented reading and writing is not the same as generative reading and writing. We should be engaging students in reading and writing activities that generate thinking, generate new ideas that students may not have discovered unless we give them the opportunity to read and write every single day. He said that there really are a lot of reading and writing strategies that are currently in schools that actually kill the love of reading and writing. He continued his presentation by posing a question, which he then addressed at the end so that he can ask us what the answer was. But the question that he posed at the beginning, before he went into these 4 things that help students become great writers, is, can you name the values I hold about teaching writers? The first value is all about volume. Remember, the best teacher of writing is writing itself, the actual act of writing. Kids have to produce a lot of bad writing before they can actually produce good writing. Expect that at the beginning, students may not have the writing skills that they need in order to produce that good writing. Think about it this way. Whenever we take on a new hobby or a new skill that we want to do, let's say, for example, you want to learn to play the piano. At the beginning, you're going to play a lot of piano pieces that may not sound great. But as you practice and engage more in playing the piano, it will get better and better and better. And that's exactly how writing should be seen. He gave the analogy using clay pots that was inspired by a book. I'll share the picture of the slide here. And basically, they gave artists 2 different choices on getting a good grade. One choice was volume. So you were graded on the amount of clay pots that you were able to create. The other option was on the amount of clay that you use. So the heavier the clay pot was, the higher score you will get. Who do you think did the best? If you said volume, you are correct. So let's not compare it to how that relates into the classroom. The heavier pots, that's the writing task that we are asked to give students every week as it pertains to state testing. The volume one is allowing students to engage in the act of writing every day in a variety of different ways, looking at mentor texts and letting themselves write until they generate new ideas and see what they are really thinking. One of the ways that he encouraged students to write every day, he gave them an activity which he modeled himself where they took a photograph every day. And the photograph will go into a notebook and they will write a little bit about that photograph, maybe to explain and give a little bit of context about what was happening in that photo. This is a very cool way to get students engaged in the act of writing every day. The bottom line is that teachers need to be writers themselves, and I've already stated this in my previous vlogs during this Writing Institute. Remember, it is important to increase the volume that our students write. They need to write every day and engage in the act of writing. It's just like when you go and run a marathon. In order to run a marathon, you don't just go and run the marathon. You have to practice a little bit every day in order to be prepared to run that marathon. He then went on to share what every classroom needs. Every classroom needs to be a workbench, a collecting space, and a playground. He also talked about why the use of paper notebooks was important. Before I go over why paper notebooks are important, I want to piggyback to having teachers be writers themselves. He shared a couple of different tips here. He said, write yourself. To use writerly thinking in your teaching, develop rehearsal strategies for finding and developing an idea in your writer's notebook. Figure out what kinds of planning make sense to you before beginning to draft. Explore the move from ideas to plans to an actual draft. Pay close attention to your thinking as you draft, revise, and edit your piece. Now let's go back to why paper notebooks are important. It is a creative collecting place for ideas, plans, images, and sketches. It is easy to trace the moves writers are making in daily rereading and revising in class. Night writing increases volume and practice. The notebook is portable, and not all students have tech at home. Putting ink to paper actually stimulates a part of your brain called the reticular activation system, which increases focus, and this is completely different than just having students type on a computer. And this, of course, comes from Handwriting Trains the Brain from 2010, so it's a research-based article. And the last point, elementary students who wrote essays with a pen not only wrote more than those on a keyboard, but They wrote faster and in more complete sentences. And this is from the University of Washington, 2009. So the question, how does anybody get better at anything? By actually doing it. So if you want your students to get better in writing, they actually have to practice and engage in writing themselves every single day. He mentioned Don Graves and something that he says with regards to writing. We have to just let students write. Sometimes they don't know what to write. They can just start writing. It doesn't even matter if they start saying, I have no idea what to write, and they just keep going, because eventually they will find that idea that they didn't know they had. Don Graves calls this writing to the surprise. So basically encourage the students to keep writing until they find that idea that they didn't know they had. Another quote from Don Graves that he shared with us was, the writing process must always be fresh to us, so that teaching writing becomes a process of discovery in its own right. And that's what we mean by writing to the surprise. So Kelly Gallagher uses poetry as a springboard for writing. So the next activity that we engaged in was having him read us a poem titled Learning the Bicycle by Wyatt Prunty. And after he read the poem, he said, pick a section of the poem that just sparks writing and write in your writer's notebook for 4 minutes. When the timer went off, he actually had us finish our thoughts, but he says that Don Graves actually encourages us to encourage students to stop mid-sentence, to encourage them to come back to it later, because they know that they have that thought that they haven't finished, and they'll come back later so they can finish it. He talked about the importance of helping students establish a writing identity, and one way, of course, that they can do this is to do a daily quick write activity and incorporate what he called flash revision. So let me tell you a little bit about flash revision. Remember that revision makes our writing better, while editing makes it correct. And that's why we need to first make our writing better before we make it correct. He talked about the importance of having the teacher share vulnerability in the classroom with their students, which again piggybacks on what Dr. Precious Simenet shared last week. When you open up a little bit about yourself, telling those stories that mean a lot to you, something remarkable happens in the writing classroom. Students start opening up as well and sharing their stories that come from the heart. All right, so let me go ahead and explain a little bit about flash revision. The teacher shares a piece of their writing. Again, it may be something that shows vulnerability. You choose. And as they are sharing their writing, they are out loud looking at it and saying, I think I should put this over here, and maybe I should start with this word, so that they are modeling the revision process as a think aloud. Then what he had us do is go back to our writing that we wrote related to the bicycle poem and look for a place that they can make their writing better. It doesn't have to be everywhere, just one place. He gave us a couple minutes, and then we turned to the person next to us and we showed them what we did. After we did that, he asked for anyone to share how they improved their writing. So as students are sharing, or the participants were sharing, for example, one person said, well, I actually took out words that I thought were not important. And he goes, okay, so then he'll have an anchor chart and he'll add writers cut out words. Then he had someone else share, well, I actually started with a question, which then he added to the anchor chart, writers sometimes start with questions. Then someone else said, well, I actually rearranged something. I moved something from this part of my writing here. And then he'll add writers reorder details. That's when he moved on to talk about the 4 moves that help students make their writing better. And he calls it an acronym known as RADAR. And this is what RADAR stands for: replace, add, delete, and reorder. He says out of all 4 of these, replace is the easiest one. But we need to encourage students to get to the deeper parts of revision, which are add, delete, and reorder. Those are deeper moves. In order to do this, he gave an example. So he doesn't really like reality shows, but he used to love the show Pimp My Ride. And so he would show the students like 10 minutes worth of that, where they show how the car used to look to how the car looked later. And he asked the students to say, okay, so how did the car change? So obviously the easiest one out of this, if you're thinking about radar and revision, was replaced. So things were replaced. But if they really think about it, they can go to add. Like he said in one example, one car got a fishing tank inside of the car. Another car got a dryer for the surfer to dry their clothes. That is adding to that vehicle. So he basically used a real world example to show students how things can also be applied to this acronym for revision. He encouraged us to do daily flash revisions to help our students learn different ways to help make their writing better. He shared a quote by Lydia Davis, which says, constant revision, whether or not you're going to do anything with what you've written, also teaches you to write better in the first place when you first write something down, which then led for him to explain what revision is. Revision is built on a habit of reading, built on a foundation of read aloud, Your ear tunes to the rhythm and sentences that work well together. Built on regular teacher modeling of the thinking that leads to revising rough draft writing. And it's built on the students' daily practice of rereading writing and then taking a few minutes to work to make it better. He then shared another type of poem, which was a spoken word on a Camaro. After he did the Camaro poem with his students, they then went into writing and found a place in the poem that really spoke to them. So basically, let's say in a week, the first day he did the bicycle poem, the second day he did the Camaro poem. On the third day, he read some poems by Marcus Jackson on love. One was when you're in love, and one is when you're not in love. And then he had the students choose which one they wanted to write about, etc. So let's say throughout the week or throughout the 8 days, he did a different poem, but it springboarded different kind of writing. He then waits at the end of that and gives the students an English notebook checklist so they can check off if they wrote to each of the different poems that he used during those days. He says if the students did it, they automatically get 50 points. What he does, though, before the students turn in their notebooks, is he tells them, all right, turn in your notebooks, but put a sticky note on the one that you want me to read. So out of the 8 different quick writes that they did on those poems, they will pick one that they really want the teacher to read, and the teacher can give them feedback on. I thought that was great. Then he would welcome the students to pick one out of the 8 different writing pieces that they have, choose one that's really interesting to them, and he would invite them to spend a little bit more time on it so that maybe they can add to it or make it better. He then proceeded to give another example about someone who wrote an essay in an editorial, and it was about, I recommend eating chips. And it was basically how someone was handling what was happening at the beginning of the pandemic. So again, he would read this model, this writing model to the students, and then that will springboard the students to create writing. He used this to write his own version, which was, I recommend playing word spaces, so that he can show students another way that they could address this particular prompt. Again, if you notice a pattern here, he is choosing different kinds of writing to springboard writing, and it also models to the students what good writing looks like so that they don't ask, how long does it have to be? They already see how that type of writing is, so that encourages them to create their own writing. And again, the daily practice of writing encourages them to become better writers. He also uses those mentor tests to ask students the questions such as, what craft moods do you notice the author making? He encourages them to name the interesting language or sentence patterns they see and to be as specific as they can about what they notice in that particular text that they will call good writing. And you can then use that to create a list of moves and post it somewhere, whether it's in your classroom or in a mini anchor chart that the students keep in their notebook, so that they can see what good writers do in their writing and they can apply that to their own writing. He calls the strategy read, analyze, emulate, or for the younger kids, imitate. So they read, they analyze what is good in the writing, and then they imitate it in their own writing. With that, he also shares, again, different kinds of writing. Maybe he shares a really good written essay and then have the students chunk it so that they can see how the writing built that writing piece. This is a great way for the students to go beyond the 5-paragraph essay, because in some of these essays that he shared with the students have 8 paragraphs, but it's a full page of well-written writing. So it's important to not let ourselves get stuck in formulaic writing and allow students to really take a deeper dive into writing and not be constricted by, oh, you should only write up to this amount. Again, they will learn this by modeling and by looking at different examples of good mentor text. For elementary students, he encouraged the passage. Eventually, we all talk about Bruno, where he modeled how it was sectioned and the building blocks of it. And on the back, he actually showed the structure of that passage, which are the building blocks for that particular essay. He showed a student model that showed the first draft of a student's writing when he was asking them to write a review about a restaurant. When they turned in their first drafts, he noticed that the students really didn't know what that looked like. So the very next day, he brought in an actual restaurant review, and the students analyzed it and looked at how it was constructed. Then he gave them back their first draft and asked them to make it better. So the comparison between the first draft and the second draft is amazing. And again, this comes from reading, analyzing, and then imitating that type of writing. He also talked about the importance of using storyboards to help students write, especially if it's sequential order. And with that, he shared a personal experience about the time that he injured his finger and what happened there. Now, with that, he showed the storyboard of that particular story, and he showed the actual order in which he wrote it. But then he had the students look at how you could rearrange the events, and all of a sudden you have a different flair to that story. Again, showing students real life models of different things and strategies that they can do in their writing. He then went on to talk about feedback and why feedback fails. He shared this information from the Harvard Business Review magazine, and this is the information that he shared with us. Learning is less a function of adding something that isn't there than it is recognizing, reinforcing, and refining what already is. Neurologically, each brain grows where it is already strongest. Getting attention to our strengths from others catalyzes learning, whereas attention to our weaknesses smothers it. Again, positive reinforcement. I've been saying this since last week, since I heard Jennifer Jacobson, right? We focus on our students' strengths when it comes to writing. We don't point out what they're doing wrong because that discourages them and it doesn't help them to really develop the areas of strength. And to reiterate this, one way to get students reading critically is to invite them to read and respond to each other's writing. So the feedback, they're sitting around, they're sharing their writing, and the writer themselves can ask them, hey, I'm not sure about this introduction. Can you hear it and let me know what you think? So that gives them agency over their own writing. And then they have different people give them feedback by talking about their strengths and giving them I wonder statements. I wonder what the house looked like. Again, the I wonder statements are similar to the questions that Jennifer Jacobson talked last week, which helps the students reflect on their writing. And if they're engaging in that act of reading each other's papers and responding to each other's papers, not only are they getting feedback from multiple people, but they're also, when they're doing it for them, because they have to read the other people's writing, they're also looking at examples of other people's writing. And if they notice something in that writing that they like, they can then imitate that in their own writing. He posed this question: how should you ask for feedback? Don't. Instead, ask for advice. And this quote was from Daniel Pink. And then Shane Parrish shared this quote: asking for feedback creates a critic. Asking for advice creates a partner. So when they're sitting around asking for feedback, hey, what advice can you give me about my introduction? What advice can you give me about the quality of my details? It really changes the way that feedback affects you as a writer. So then he went back to the first question that he asked, which was, what decisions did I make about writing in the work we did today? And this is a summary of all that. 1, choose seeds. Seeds like the poetry that he shared that spark writing and help students get started on a writing idea. 2, the teacher should write in front of the students. Again, the teacher needs to be a writer themselves. The students should be able to see the teacher engaging in the act of writing and sharing their own writing. 3, how to respond to seeds. 4, how to revise quick writing. 5, which quick write to spend more time on. 6, which craft move to add to your writing. 7, what feedback you wanted from those in your writing group. And 8, how to support one another as writers. He said that in a writing classroom, we need to shift from the teacher just speaking and sharing what they know well about writing to letting the students explore what good writing looks like and engage in the actual act of writing. For more ways that you can use mentor text to help your students with writing, you should definitely check out his book, in which he provides many examples of the seeds that he used in order to engage students in writing and examples of his students' actual essays and what they were able to produce. My friends, that is all that I have for today, and this was a very long video, so I hope you stuck with me until the very end. If you did, insert a notebook emoji to represent writing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought or any questions you may have and add your emoji. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications so you don't miss any future videos. I hope you have a beautiful, magical day, and don't forget to smile. Hello dreamers, wishers, and magical thinkers. Thank you so much for making it to the very end of this video and for showing your support. If you'd like to subscribe, you can do so by clicking on my picture down here. You can also check out my latest videos here and here. Don't forget to believe in the magic that's inside you because you are capable of great things. See you next time.